Hey, welcome back guys. Hope you're all doing well. Got a bit of an unusual video for you today. It's still a DIY project, but it has nothing to do with guitars. Well, let me show you. All right, so it is the beginning of November here in wonderful Alberia, which means there is some snow on the ground, and it's time to finish off some outdoor stuff. This year I spent most of my summer, I think I mentioned, doing landscaping, which included making this patio. Big pain because my yard is on a hill, so that took most of the summer. I've now, because it snowed, had to take all my cushions off and cover them and stuff like that. What I'm working on today though is a gate for this deck. I have a baby and a toddler, and I would like my toddler to be able to play outside on the deck where I can see her from my kitchen and come out and play with her and go back in if I need to, instead of just having her have kind of the run of the yard. So yeah, this thing needs a gate. So here's what we're dealing with. I just put in these stairs. Unfortunately, I had to dig in to the ground to get them in because I have so much dirt here because my rough grade was on a slope. Yeah, there's a lot of material there. Anyway, just built these stairs. Now I got to get a gate in here so that my kid can play safely and I don't have to worry about her running around and hurting herself on the stone steps over on that side of the patio and that kind of stuff. So I've got come set this up real quick, and I've probably got, guessing, half an hour before she wakes up from her nap. Mom is busy with the newborn, so I don't have much time. Let's get to it, shall we? Okay, by necessity, most of this video will be in voiceover because it's going to be loud here and I'm in a hurry. Yes, I know I should be wearing goggles. Sorry. I think they're at the other shop right now, or maybe I have some here. Anyway, I'm going to get to it. There is probably a better way to do this if I have had more time, but you'll see how I do it here. I'll explain it in voiceover, and feel free to leave me your comments, as always. Let's get after it. So I already did all my measuring when I went to pick out my material and everything, but you'll have seen just there I went and held this board up against that gap and just marked it with the pencil using the edge of the wood as my kind of ruler. When I'm doing this kind of work, that's more so how I like to do my measurements. And I did the same thing when I built my fence. I would just take my boards, hold them up for the most part, and just mark them and cut that way. And then if I need the same, you can see what I'm doing here. I use the prior board to measure it and cut that way. So it depends a little bit on what level of precision I need, but for a lot of this type of work, that's how I like to do it. And then I just use my prior board, like I said, to measure. So I'm trying to kind of emulate the look of the rest of the deck as much as possible here. And you'll see at the end I did a pretty good job. The gate still needs to be sealed, but that won't take long and it'll kind of look a little bit more close in color. What the rest of the deck doesn't have, of course, is this bottom piece that I just cut. The gate needs a bottom. The rest of it, all those upright sections, the spindles, are attached to the actual deck itself. So one extra piece of wood, but other than that, the construction is going to be very similar. A horizontal and vertical 2x4 along the top, and yeah, a small 1.5 inch piece on the bottom to kind of finish it off. So of course, when I measured my verticals, I had to account for the fact that there was going to be that horizontal 2x4 along the top. That's going to span the full width of this. And then the vertical one, the kind of 90-degree angle one, rather, is going to be a little bit shorter because it's going to fit inside the outer beams. So that's how I'm going to stabilize this thing. Very straightforward design. Nothing really out of the ordinary here, but you need to think about these things if you're going to do a build like this, because otherwise you're going to end up with, you know, your verticals 1.5 inches too long because you measured the full height, and you're going to, yeah. Anyway, I think you get the picture. I now have to get these set up at 90-degree angles and start getting this frame put together. Unfortunately, my little work table here, which is really helpful, is not big enough. It doesn't take up as much space as the width of the gate, and so I'm not going to be able to use it for a lot of the assembly here, but I'll be able to use it for some. Do pilot holes when you're doing this kind of stuff. I know it's tempting not to bother with them, but if you don't, and see, here's where I run out of space, and I'm like, well, how am I going to do this? Anyway, it's tempting not to bother with the pilot holes, but if you don't, then there's a pretty good chance that you'll split your 2x4s, unless you're using really small screws. I never used to bother with pilot holes, but I've kind of learned my lesson on that. So Do those, that way you're not going to end up with a bunch of cracks in your 2x4. Make the pilot holes either the width of the inner diameter of the screw or very close to it. If you don't know what I mean by that, inner diameter is the width of the core of the screw without accounting for the threads. Outer diameter is the full width of the screw with the threads. So you don't want to go that wide, otherwise the screw doesn't do anything. But you don't need to go really any smaller than that inner diameter, because it'll still get the same amount of binding power if you use the inner diameter. So I go either that wide or very close to it when I'm selecting my pilot hole size. If anybody disagrees with me on that, let me know, because I'm always happy to learn, but that's how I learned it, and it's worked well for me so far. So here I'm doing the vertical piece that's going to be at 90 degrees to that top. I had to trim it down, which makes sense because I just cut it based on the width of the other one before. And here I want it nice and tight, basically a friction fit in there. So you'll see here I've got it so that it's kind of perfectly that width. I'm going to do pilot holes again so I don't split the side of my board. I'm just kind of guessing here, like I know what 3.5 inches looks like, which is the actual width of a 2x4 pretty much. And so I'm just kind of guessing where the two of them can go, and then making some intermittent places along the top for my other screws. I get them started here because I don't really have, my workbench isn't quite going to go high enough to hold this. So I get the screws started so that I can do it as a one-hand job, getting them pinned in the rest of the way. And yeah, that's kind of the gist. This video, by the way, is sped up to 300%. So if you're wondering, oh, here I get a little smarter and realize it doesn't need to be a one-hand job. I can just clamp it in place. Goofball. Anyway, if you're wondering how fast this actually happens, it's a third of this speed. Not that that matters. I mean, usually woodworking isn't a race against the clock. We're all busy, but take your time, do it correct, and you won't regret it. Fortunately, this one went well for me despite being in a hurry. You might be wondering by whose standards it went well, and the answer is my wife. She said she liked it, and that is good enough for me when it comes to this sort of stuff. So here I am pinning this in from the top, of course. I want to make sure that this gate is relatively sturdy. And yeah, that's 3 screws is plenty. My grandfather, if he were building this, would have also used a 1/4 liter of glue at this point to make sure that nobody ever could take it apart. But I don't have quite the level of confidence that he had. And so for me, screws that I can take out if I screw something up are the better option. Next up, I'm going to put the bottom on, and the bottom, like that 90-degree piece, actually ends up going between these because I want the verticals to match up with the rest of the deck, which means I want them to be kind of the full length. I've got some snow on the bottom of my gate here, unfortunately. But anyway, you can see, once again, rather than measuring it specifically, I'm just going in and marking it based on holding it against the gate itself, and it works perfectly. So fortunate for me that it worked out. Double checking that with a measuring tape would not be a bad idea, but this is what I ended up doing. Drilling my pilot holes again here, and then I will get this bottom piece pinned in, and you can see how I do the verticals. Not much left of this. This is coming along quickly. We'll be done soon. Don't worry, when I go to cut all of the little vertical spindles, I will speed this up even more, in case you were worried, in case you were wondering about that. So putting my 4 screws in here, that's all I've got for this one, is the 4 of them. And this is what I'm going to use to pin my spindles to as well. So it provides the stability at the bottom and the other place to fasten those, because again, along the rest of the deck, those are fastened to the deck itself. And if I did that, well, you'd have to jump the gate to get out because it wouldn't be able to move. So that is it. We've got the frame completed now, and it is time to get our spindles cut and put on there. For the rest of the deck, I'm not going to bother showing you guys this, but for the rest of the deck, the top and bottom of all the spindles are cut at a pretty significant angle, a pretty acute angle. And so I'm setting my total length using the stop on my saw here, and then I'm going to angle it, and you guys can see how I get those angles consistent throughout. Pretty straightforward. I just angle my saw, make my cut, and again, I'll speed this up after my first one's done. And then I flip the board and make another cut. I didn't actually get a protractor out and measure the angle. I'm just kind of eyeballing it to make it make sense, but it turns out the way that I want it to. So don't worry. just make sure that you're accounting for the full length when you're doing this. Okay, you want the long end to be the right length, not the short end. Okay, if you do it the short end, you're going to end up with your piece being too long. So sometimes you need an extra piece to do a test cut. I've seen people screw this up a few times, but yeah, check your first one, make sure it's the right length before you cut all of them, and you should be good to go. So let's speed this up and get these spindles cut, and then we'll get them pinned into place. There we go, 900 times speed. If only I could actually move this quickly, I might get projects done in a reasonable amount of time. Although letting my paint dry would probably be an even more irritating process. So getting these cut, they're basically done now. I end up doing an extra one just in case. And then next up, I want to be able to pin these in quickly. So I'm going to drill a pilot hole in each of them and start a screw. And then I'll just space them out and strap them in. So we'll blast through this part too, because you guys don't need to watch me drill a hole over and over again, you know, any less than 900 times speed, and you don't need to watch me get a whole bunch of screws started at a reasonable speed either. But that's what I'm doing here. I'm just lining it up, drilling a hole kind of in the center on each one where it needs to be screwed in, and then I'm going to come in and get my screws in there part way so that when the time comes I can just space them out properly and fire them in the rest of the way and save myself some time and not have to use two hands to kind of get the screw started and all of that stuff. So that didn't take very long. I mean, it took longer than the video showed, but it didn't take very long. Then I come in and kind of get this set up the way that I need to. Luckily, this table allows me to put some clamps into the side to, well, to get this thing stabilized somewhat so that I can do what I need to do. And I'm using a spacer, a 2x4 spacer, which is very convenient. I went and measured the rest of the deck, and it turns out that, you know, these things are 3.5 inches apart on the rest of the deck, and that's perfect. It means I just get to use a board to space them out. I did do one extra spindle here, so you'll notice that kind of as this progresses, but this really did not take long. We're back to the 300 times, or the triple speed here. And yeah, it was pretty quick. The measurement doesn't quite work out perfectly, so the last one's a little closer there, but the rest of them are all spaced out just the same. Pretty simple job here to finish this off, and fortunately it's going to fit nicely. As you'll see, I didn't end up recording me putting the gate hardware on, but that's, I mean, once it's in there and sitting the way that I have it at the end of this video, that's a simple matter of just screwing a couple hinges in. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, even though it was a little out of the ordinary for me. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.